Pop quiz, hotshot. You're Nintendo, and you just realized that you haven't released a classic game on your Nintendo Switch Online service in more than a month. But at the same time, you also don't want to take attention away from your hot new Zelda game. What do? Apparently, the answer is to dump a bunch of Super Mario Advance games on the service, all of which are ports of games that were previously available on the Switch. That's right, on May 26th, we'll be getting 3 more Super Mario Advance games, including ports of Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario World, and Yoshi's Island. That's cool, I guess, but are any of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, Nintendo Power, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said about these games when they first came out. So go and grab your favorite cape and a box full of vegetables, because this is another supersized episode of the Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
Pluck things from the ground and hurl them at your enemies. Pluck your enemies from the ground and hurl them at your other enemies. Super Mario Advance, only for Game Boy Advance. 4 can play off 1 game pack. Rated E for everyone.
If you grew up in the 1980s and 90s, then there was an expectation whenever Nintendo released a new console. You see, no matter how big or small the system was, Nintendo would always pair the launch with a Mario platformer. You saw the original Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System, Mario Land on the Game Boy, Mario World on the Super Nintendo, and of course, who can forget Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. So, when it came to Nintendo's next-generation handheld, all eyes were on what Mario game would launch on the Game Boy Advance. Unfortunately, instead of coming up with something new and original, Nintendo decided to bring back an old favorite, Super Mario Bros. 2. Specifically, it was an updated port of the 16-bit All-Stars version released a decade earlier. But hey, it was still Mario 2 and it's still a fun game. Did that disappoint die-hard Nintendo fans? Probably not. But forget about them, because we're here to see what the critics said back when this happened. Now, Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Super Mario Advance good scores, but you could tell that there was some disappointment in the game choice. For example, Shu argued that while Mario Advance is an improved version of the already practically perfect game, most people would probably agree with me that Super Mario 2, although great, is the least favorite in the series. He liked that the original stuff was preserved nicely, but was annoyed by the new voices. Mark also enjoyed this re-release, concluding that if you've never played Mario 2 before, you'll love Mario Advance. Solid platforming action with 4 very different playable characters, airtight control, and the added twist of an alternate dimension for all of the levels. If you've already played Mario 2 to death like me, there are a few cool additions, but nothing worth getting excited about. EGM ended up giving Super Mario Advance an average score of 8.3 out of 10. While Electronic Gaming Monthly may have held back their enthusiasm, it was Nintendo Power that seemed the most annoyed by this re-release. Giving it a 3.5 out of 5, Drew called the game primitive by comparison to Rayman. Alan twisted that knife, asking the question on everybody's mind: why remake Super Mario Bros. 2 when Super Mario Bros. 3 is an infinitely better game? Yawn! Mario Bros., on the other hand, is a fine piece of work, adding an extra star to Super Mario Advance's score. While Nintendo Power may have been down on it, Game Informer had no problems giving the game an average score of 8.9 out of 10 and highly recommending Super Mario Advance. The same goes for GamePro, who gave the game a 4.5 out of 5 and called it the weirdest and most underrated of Mario's many surreal adventures. Mario Advance may not be the most impressive showcase for the Game Boy Advance's power, but it's great for a nostalgic trip, great for road trips. Hell, it's just plain great. This seems to be how a lot of the fans reacted, which led to Nintendo releasing 3 more of these Mario Advance games on the Game Boy Advance. Thankfully, they're all better than this first installment. After launching the Game Boy Advance with a port of Super Mario Bros. 2, many figured that Nintendo would follow this up with another title from Super Mario All-Stars. But, as longtime Nintendo fans will attest, when you expect the company to zig, they always zag, making it hard to know exactly what they're going to do next. Instead of getting an updated version of Super Mario Bros. 1 or 3, they jumped right to Super Mario World, the beloved Super NES pack-in game. While everybody agreed that Super Mario World was a great platformer, the question remained, were the critics enthusiastic about this re-release? When it came to Electronic Gaming Monthly, the answer to that question is an enthusiastic yes. John started his review with a simple question. One of the best platform games of all time is now available in handheld form for only $30. Honestly, what more could you ask for? The GBA conversion of Super Mario World is almost flawless, with just a few minor quirks that only hardcore fans of the original will notice. Chris took this time to make what I'm going to call a controversial confession. Of all the Marios, World is my least favorite, but I still love it. It's like trying to decide which color of Skittle is best. They're all good. The improvements are welcome, but unnecessary. Will anyone honestly play as Luigi? Maybe if you have to do everything, but he's too slow and awkward. EGM ended up giving Mario Advance 2 an average score of 9 out of 10, a big improvement over that first game. Unsurprisingly, Nintendo Power also liked the sequel more than the original, giving Mario Advance 2 a score of 4.5 out of 5. Jenny explains that Super Mario World is a brilliant platformer, full of the things the world loves Mario games for: creative level designs, excellent challenges, and tricky secrets. George agreed, concluding that Super Mario World was the best side-scrolling action game of all time when it was released over 10 years ago, and it still is the best today. You saw similar scores from Computer and Video Games, who gave the game a 9 out of 10. Game Informer went even higher, giving Mario Advance 2 an average score of 9.4 out of 10. However, the highest score once again comes from GamePro, who gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. This is an easy one, folks. Unless you've got something against lizards with unusually versatile tongues, you'd be nuts not to buy this perfect recreation of one of the finest platform games ever made. Buy it, play it, and then think about the potential of a Game Boy Advance Zelda, A Link to the Past port, or the possibilities offered by a new 2D Metroid, and set your saliva glands to permanent drool. And would you look at that, GamePro was right. In one of Nintendo's more predictable moves, they ended up giving us a great Link to the Past port, as well as a cool new 2D Metroid sequel on the Game Boy Advance. We've already talked about those.
Escape to a world of enchantment. Run with the wonders of nature. Swim in our crystal clear waters. See things you've never seen before in the complete Super Mario World. With 78 levels, it's Mario's biggest adventure ever, now on Game Boy Advance. Come, spend time with us. Rated E for everyone.
With the release of Super Mario Advance 3 inevitable, surely Nintendo would take this chance to give us an updated version of Super Mario Bros. 3, right? Nope, they saved that gem for Super Mario Advance 4, and don't call me Shirley. Instead, what we got was Yoshi's Island, the follow-up to Super Mario World. While it was generally well received when it first came out, it had kinda gotten lost to the hype of Super Mario 64. Now was a chance to revisit the 16-bit classic, with the potential to appreciate it even more on the small screen. Now, believe it or not, this is actually the first time Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed Yoshi's Island. That's right, they completely overlooked the game back when it first hit the Super Nintendo in 1995. We'll never know what they would have rated the original game, But they did give the Game Boy Advance port an average score of 9.2 out of 10. Miguel called it one of the freshest, most lovingly crafted side-scrollers that still plays well to this day. If you're worried about Yoshi's preschool aesthetics, fret not. Its visual style, while primitive, is charming and quickly grows on you. Mark also liked the game, noting that it bears all the trademarks of a great Mario game, including colorful graphics, spot-on control, and dozens of wildly different levels, all packed with enemies and obstacles that explore every gameplay possibility. You also saw high scores from the likes of Game Informer, who gave the game an average score of 8.75 out of 10. Computer and Video Games liked it slightly more, giving it a 9 all the way back in November of 2002. Not surprisingly, the highest score once again came from GamePro, who gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. So predictable. As the Game Boy Advance grows up, Super NES ports are becoming a less and less welcome sight on store shelves. Yoshi is the exception that proves the rule. Don't miss this nearly lost gem of the Mario universe. While Yoshi's Island certainly isn't my favorite Mario platformer, it's hard to argue with GamePro's reasoning. Give it a look if you haven't played it already. While it was released on the Switch several months ago, I figured that we might as well talk about the final entry in the short-lived Super Mario Advance series. That's right, it's the clunkily named Super Mario Bros. 3 Super Mario Advance 4, a title that is so unwieldy that it probably single-handedly killed the franchise. Terrible name aside, I think we can all agree that this was one of the very best games on the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System. But were the critics still in love with it 13 years later? The answer is yes, obviously. Shu called it one of the best games of all time. Not just on a Nintendo system, not just for a Mario game, not just when it came out many moons and mushrooms ago, but of all time. Perfect controls, perfectly constructed stages, perfect graphics, perfect game design that delicately balances anyone can pick it up gameplay and hardcore platforming action that'll make your palms sweat and your stomach churn when you go for the death-defying leaps. Shane, on the other hand, couldn't help but notice a problem with this series. Nintendo's sure milking Mario for all he's worth. Remember Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo? That game contains remakes of 4 classic Mario titles, while Game Boy Advance owners have to dole out $30 a pop for those tasty chestnuts. Most of the other magazines didn't seem all that concerned about the pricing, with Game Informer giving it a 9.8 out of 10, and Nintendo Official Magazine going as high as a 92%, making it one of their top-rated games of the year. About the lowest score you're going to find is a 4.5 out of 5 from GBA World. That's also the same score that GamePro gave the game, concluding that admittedly Super Mario Bros. 3 seems like a weird step back from Super Mario World and Yoshi's Island, but that doesn't make it less of a classic. It's a true test of your gaming mettle, a must for the Mario completist, and validation of your sense of nostalgia. Check the game out on the Switch to see if you feel like it's a weird step back from Yoshi's Island.
Look, Mom, he's cute.
Yoshi's back, and now with his targeting system, he aims to please. Yoshi's Island, only for Game Boy Advance. Rated E for everyone.
Hey, thanks for watching us break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes every time Nintendo adds another classic game to the Switch. We have a whole playlist full of these episodes, so give that a look. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite Super Mario Advance game? Look, I'm partial to Super Mario Bros. 3 because it's, Super Mario Bros. 3. But I know that there are a lot of people out there who love Mario World and even Yoshi's Island. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back on Sunday with a new episode of 10 Things We Learned This Week, followed next week with a review of Oni, Road to the Mightiest Oni. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,